Hello, welcome back to our Send Searchlights for our February edition. I can't believe it's February already. The year is flying. Um, Good afternoon if you're not in the UK and elsewhere in the world, or good morning if you are in the UK or in Europe. It's always lovely to hear where people are from. So whilst we're waiting for others to join us, do feel free to pop in the chat where you're from this morning. It's still a very dreary day here in England. I don't think the rain has stopped. I think we're all thinking about trading our cars in for boats at the moment. It's been so wet. So, morning. I can see Milka from Qatar. Fab. I think. Morning, Leonie. Great. Well, I think it is dead on 8 o'clock UK time. So we will get started. Lots to fill the session with this morning. So today we are focusing on navigating the complexities of exam access arrangements. And this is a crucial, yet often time-consuming task. So by the end of today's webinar, we hope you leave feeling confident and equipped with the knowledge of what's involved with access arrangements. Just the other day, actually, I was talking to a friend who was in the primary sector, the same as me, and she had done some exam invigilating in a secondary school. And she said to me, she's like, I just didn't realise what was involved. So I've done access arrangements for the primary sector. So if you're not familiar with UK arrangements, we have statutory assessments at the end of the primary phase in year 6, and so we can start applying for access arrangements for that. But obviously, as you move into the more formal exams in secondary, there are lots more considerations to take in place. So today we're going to show you what tools can help you with those exam access arrangements, how you can complete the necessary documentation for external examination boards. So I will stop talking and hand over to Debbie, who's going to start us off today.
Thank you, Polly. We thought we would start by unpicking the why of access arrangements. When we talk about access arrangements, the first thing to clarify for parents and staff is that we are not giving students an advantage. We are removing a barrier. If a student has a visual impairment, a braille paper doesn't make the exam any easier, it makes it accessible. This is often defined as reasonable adjustments. Our goal is to ensure that the assessment or exam measures the student's knowledge and skills, not their disability. However, an arrangement must never compromise the competence standards, meaning we can't give a student a dictionary in a Spanish vocabulary test, as that would defeat the purpose of the exam. It's also important to note that an access arrangement cannot be something granted only for the final exam. It must be the student's normal way of working in the classroom, during internal tests, and for homework. If you are ever asked for evidence, it would be helpful to show teachers observations, samples of classwork where a student has used a laptop, and previous internal exam papers showing extra time was used, often marked in a different coloured pen, as a few examples. To qualify for access arrangements, the student's difficulty must be substantial, rather than minor or typical. Here in the UK, in the eyes of the JCQ, which is the Joint Council for Qualifications, and the UK Equality Act 2010, this means the impairment has a significant impact on a learner's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. I'm now going to hand you back over to Polly, who is going to explain in more detail about how we gather evidence to put forward for exam access arrangements.
Thanks, Debbie. So as Debbie mentioned, to apply for those exam access arrangements, the adaptations required need to be a way of working that the student is used to. So Debbie gave us a few examples, but for example, if they've got a scribe to support them when completing internal writing assessments, or if they're given extra time, that needs to be evidenced. And sometimes that can be quite difficult when you know as a teacher or a practitioner that you're giving the students that additional time, additional support, but actually how do you evidence that? So what can be really helpful when applying for access arrangements is to provide evidence through screeners that are designed for this very purpose. And as Debbie mentioned, we've got the JCQ here in the UK, and it's a membership organisation that represents the 8 largest national exam boards here in the UK. So essentially it's a central hub where these boards collaborate to ensure that exams, so like GCSEs, A-levels, vocational qualifications, are administered consistently across the country. And this is where schools are required to submit evidence to ensure that students who need specific arrangements get them. Now here at Renaissance, we have 2 solutions that are specifically designed to support with applications of access arrangements. So we just wanted to share those with you. Some of you might be using them already, which is great. Some of you might not have even realised that these were available, but it's just something to share. So the first one is Exact, and this assessment is divided into several subtests that measure those specific skills that the exam access arrangement boards are looking for. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes in total, and it looks at word recognition, reading comprehension, and within that reading comprehension, it looks at both the accuracy, so the understanding of the text, and also the speed, so how fast the student reads. It looks at spelling, and it looks at dictation, and that can either be handwriting or typing speed. So it measures how many words per minute a student can produce, which is one of the key pieces of evidence needed if you're trying to justify the use of a scribe or the use of a laptop in exams. So actually, how does that help with the application? So this, as a school or a setting, you can use Exact results to show a picture of need. And because Exact provides standardised scores, a specialist assessor can then use those results as formal evidence. And it's really clear, it's usually a standard score of 84 below. So some key benefits for schools is that you can do a group test. So many traditional assessments sometimes need to be done one-on-one, but Exact can be administered to a whole class or a whole cohort. So we have some secondary schools that screens everybody. So I think by the time they get to year 9, they all do the Exact assessment. So actually a school can be really confident with which students might need that additional support during exams. And it also does remove that teacher bias by providing that standardised data. Excuse me. So I know as a teacher, when I was teaching, I could see the students that would really have benefited from some additional time. And because you develop those relationships and you think they'll do so well if they get some extra time, but actually they didn't really need it. They just needed that support to improve their strategies for how to attempt an exam. So when you've got that standardized data, it's that factual information which can be really helpful. So that's Exact, but we've also got Recall, and that looks at the more cognition side of learning. So it provides a standardized score for working memory, so that ability to hold and manipulate information. Processing speed, so how quickly a student can perform simple cognitive tasks. And that's assessed through 3 subtests. So there's a phonological loop test, which looks at the auditory short-term memory. That's really important for following the instructions. So again, you can see how that then relates to those exam conditions. There's the visuospatial sketchpad. So that's the visual short-term memory. And then it also assesses that central executive function, which is the management system of the brain that coordinates memory and attention. So these scores can be used alongside Exact to prove that there may be an underlying cognitive issue, which is preventing a student from processing information quickly. And therefore you might benefit from extra time or a scribe. And as Debbie said, to ensure that level playing field in exam conditions. So Recall's processing speed data supports this by showing that a student's brain cannot output that information fast enough to meet the demands of a standard exam. So those are a couple of tools that if you're not already using, or if you think, oh, what sort of things do I need to evidence? Just some of those skills that students need, you can evidence through those tools. So I'll now hand back to Debbie, who will explain how all of this can all be pulled together for that all important application to the exam boards.
Thanks, Polly. So we've spoken about the why of exam access arrangements and looked at some tools that can help gather evidence. Now, these tools are powerful and provide useful standardised scores. However, they don't stand alone. The final part requires you, the SENCO, teacher or support staff to paint that overall picture of need. Think of yourselves as investigators. You take the objective data, the test scores, and marry it with the subjective data, teacher feedback, and student history. The evidence required isn't just a matter of submitting the scores from the tests, it's how those numbers present in the classroom. It is your expert opinion that the students' difficulties are significant and complex. To create that picture of need, you need to bridge the gap between the two types of evidence. Think of the data as the what, and what we need to do next is the answer, the so what. This is where you explain the impact. If a student has a low working memory score, how does that look in a history lesson? It might be that a student can't hold a complex essay question in their head while writing the answer. It might be that a student who forgets the beginning of the paragraph by the time they reach the end. So some practical ways to collect this information might be teacher checklists. Don't just ask the teachers, does this student need extra time? Ask, does the student finish their work at the same time as their peers? Or do they rely on a laptop to produce legible work? Student voice. Ask the student how they feel during timed assessments. Their own voice is powerful evidence. File reviews. Look back at primary school records or previous school reports. A history of need is much more convincing than a sudden diagnosis in year 10 or 11. If you're currently using star reading assessments, if students are scoring a normed reference standardised score of 85 or below, this may be an indication that they would benefit from extra time or a reader in an external exam. When you are completing applications for access arrangements, it might be helpful to consider these questions. What is the barrier? For example, the student has very low processing speed. How do we know? For example, classroom observations and data from specific assessments such as exact and recall. What are we going to do about it? For example, the student currently uses 25% extra time for all internal mock exams. I'll hand back over to Polly now, who will provide us with a summary of our conversation today.
Thanks, Debbie. As I mentioned at the beginning, as a former SENCO myself, I know what a daunting task collating evidence for exam access arrangements can be. So we really hope today has helped break those tasks down a bit, provide you with a bit of background about why you're doing it. I remember that I had, when I was new to the role, especially, I had teachers come up to me and say, oh, Joe needs additional time in his exam. And I was just like, oh, right, okay. And I hadn't really thought about the build up to it and all that evidence that you're collecting beforehand. So I hope that we've provided you with some fresh ideas of how to go about sorting out those access arrangements. Now, as always, we provide illuminations to help condense our meaty conversations and usually lots of information thrown at you into some actionable chunks and next steps for you. So here's a few top tips for today. So evidence those usual ways of working. Ensure that any support that you're providing in the exams is reflected in that student's daily school life. Bridge the gap between the data and the impact. And this was really helpful to me when I was looking into it, is providing more than just the what. So more than just the test scores, explain the so what. And I think that sort of resonated to me when I was doing like my university coursework and things like that. It's always back it up with the so what. So that was something that was sort of really helpful to me. Diversify your evidence collection. So move beyond those sort of yes, no questions, collect student voice and look at that history of need. Use efficient screening tools. So it's not an absolute must. We're not here to bombard you with things that you need to get in your schools, especially when budgets are tight. But today we did look at recall and exact. And as Debbie mentioned, STAR assessments can provide you with those sort of early indicators as well. I'm just going to pause there because we're going to launch just a poll for those of you who did wish to find out more. I popped some links into the chat whilst Debbie was talking. But if you would like to find out more, please do fill in the poll there. I'll also pause at that point because we did have some questions pop up in the chat. So we have got time to answer those. So one of the questions was whether a specific qualification was needed to administer these assessments. And the answer is no, anybody can administer the assessments. And I've got another question here that says, are these tests accepted by JCQ as evidence or are they for internal use only? So exact and recall, you can use to submit as evidence to the JCQ. The caveat to the specific qualifications is as a school or a setting, you can fill in part 1 of JCQ, form 8. So that's the first part. Part B does need that specialist assessor to fill in. But again, they can use a second part of exact. So if you've got the first part done as a school, that can be submitted for part 1. And then for part 2, a specialist assessor can use the next part of exact for their part. So it does sort of work in tandem with the applications for JCQ and those specialist assessors as well. If we go back to the application and put structure into it. So what are the barriers? How do you know what the barriers are? And what are we doing about those barriers? So lots of detail there. We really hope it's been helpful. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our next Send Searchlights is on the 10th of March. So this time next month, where we are celebrating the National Year of Reading. So this is a huge initiative in the UK, but Debbie and myself are on a mission to take this worldwide. There's no reason why not. So please do join us for our practical webinar where we help you achieve that literacy success. So we'll be looking at the year of reading, but also looking at those specific learning difficulties that can be associated with reading. So we'll touch on dyslexia as well. We'll show you how you can use data to spot those reading barriers and how you can support your learners for maximum impact. So we really hope to see you then. If you have any questions following our webinar today on JCQ applications or exam access arrangements, please do visit our website where you can find all our contact details if you'd like to get in touch and find out more. But I hope you have a great rest of the day, if there's the rest of the day to have. But if you are approaching the end of the day, we really hope you have a lovely evening and see you again next month. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for joining us today and look forward to seeing you again next month.